It is day number 3 here in San Diego, and your wrap-up starts now. This is Heart Rhythm TV. You know the crew here. We're giving you your daily wrap. A lot of activities. We're leading into something really special tonight that we'll come back to. But what were some of the sessions today that really piqued your interest?
I just want to give a shout out to the AP Council. Today they hosted a luncheon, and it was really about collaboration, forming mentorships and sponsorships, and a good time was had by all.
The Allied Professional Lounge, again, going really strong. Someone was saying there still isn't enough room and they need to make it a larger lounge.
I'm voting for a bigger lounge next year. We'll see what happens.
I love that. Mikhail was cruising around the posters today, all day, and you were kind of the man on the street around the poster sessions?
Yes, I think it's important to highlight the poster session. There's some really good science. I spend a lot of time there, specifically the CIED posters, some data on how to manage leads at the time of TTVR, data on CIEDs, data on leadless pacemaker and optimizing battery longevity of dual chamber AVIR. Really a lot of good science, and I think it's important to highlight the poster sessions.
Awesome. JC, how did you spend your day?
Well, I just talked with Dr. Nadim Mani, and we were talking about the BRAVE study was presented at a late clinical trial. You see a difficult situation, Brugada syndrome, 50 patients randomized for control group, all with ICDs. Control group versus ablation group for prevention, even in patients without, in patients with history of ventricular fibrillation. So they did so well that it was stopped before time, before the conclusion, and it gives you a recommendation that we can consider ablation as a prevention treatment in this difficult situation. You also did this work with the sudden cardiac death and ventricular arrhythmia, testing ablation versus ICD. Maybe we can do this with Brugada syndrome in future.
That's exciting. Nashua?
I saw the BioLibra late-breaking clinical trial by Dr. Katifa and Dr. Poole.
And it was cool that we had 2 presenters.
Yeah.
Both of them women doing BioLibra.
And this trial looked at ventricular arrhythmias and death in patients with non-ischemic cardiomyopathy and devices. And they looked specifically at the sex difference in outcomes. They found that there was a high risk still of ventricular arrhythmias, like 14% in that patient population at 3 years follow-up, as well as 12% risk of death. However, women had less risk of ventricular arrhythmias or death in that study. The really interesting thing is that they aimed to recruit 40% women, but they ended up with 48%. And that's amazing. It was a lot of work, a lot of effort, and it was just fantastic.
Major strategic focus by the NIH, by PCORI, any funding source wants to see underrepresented minorities and women. And to get 48 is just absolutely incredible. Kudos to Valentina and Jeannie Poole.
Yeah, I think we want more balanced clinical trials. It's always been a challenge. And I think it also kind of reaffirmed a clinical question. We said, hey, let's re-ask the question. And I think we're still doing the right thing. And we did it in a balanced way in the study.
So we know women have longer QT intervals. It's a structural heart disease, but good news for women that their propensity for VTVF is less. I think when they adjusted it for mortality and adjusted other variables, it was quite similar. But it's really interesting to just examine some of these biological differences. Dee, how did you spend your day?
I just attended a session on MRIs. So we know that MRIs can be done safely in patients with cardiac implantable devices, but access is still an issue. So HRS just came out with a paper, HRS call to action, that basically says we need better collaboration between specialists, industry, and regulators to just get them the access.
Dan?
Well, I mean, what struck me today was the meta-analysis for VT ablation, which included now VANISH2 data. VANISH2, a great study. With 1,600 patients included now, again, what we found is a trend towards mortality benefit, but still no statistical significance. And then all the other conclusions that we've seen in other studies, which is ICD discharges, recurrence, all lower with VT ablation, hospitalizations are lower. So the question becomes, now with 1,600 randomized patients pooled in a meta-analysis without a mortality benefit, when will we see a mortality benefit? It's a heterogeneous and challenging substrate. So Rod, I'd love your take on that.
Well, maybe we don't need to. I mean, we know the reduction of shocks and the improvement in quality of life. Speak to any patient that's had and suffered from a shock and the PTSD that comes with it and phantom shocks. But I mean, I'll go on record and clearly on Heart Rhythm TV that I believe VT ablation has mortality benefit. But if you take a look at our heart failure colleagues, the sacubitril valsartan was 8,000 patients to show these mortality benefits that are absolute reductions of 1 or 2%. So I think clearly the degree or magnitude isn't so high, if it is, because these patients all have background ICD.
Yeah.
I think that's where there's a challenge. But if you were certainly to go back into the 90s and then take a look at ablation versus control, it would have mortality benefit. The other issue we have with VT ablations is crossovers. Because if someone's really suffering and they're getting something, then they end up getting ablated.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that to contrast and kind of intuitively, it was surprising to me is, sinus rhythm therapy in the heart failure population, multiple randomized trials. You pool all that in a meta-analysis, it's incredible, And then intellectually, essentially when you perform a VT ablation for ICE therapies, they are trying to, trying to die, and you go there and you prevent that. But at the end of the day, it's just a more complex question. And I agree with you. I think there is a mortality benefit. And intuitively, we see the impact on our patients all the time.
And I just came out of this session, which was called Diamonds to Dust, My Worst Complication. And we had some really incredible presentations about just routine PVI and having it go south. And, Boris Schmidt talked about a really unfortunate PFA case. And, Kyoko Sojima also talked about one. I shared one of my worst complications. And it was a very emotional session. And someone even said, we need to have more of these mandatory, because we do go around and saying, okay, everything's great, this is awesome, new technologies. But when we can actually get to the humility aspect of it, everyone's had cases that didn't go the way they wanted to. How we deal with those, the importance of mentors, the importance of owning complications. That was actually a really special session. And someone said it should be mandatory for everyone to participate in those.
I tell you, that's, I wasn't there, but that's powerful. I think that, I always say every surgeon carries with them the stories of what they've been through. And we've had great cases. We've all had our challenges. And, I think we could learn from each other. So.
And at lunch today, I was at the AVEIR, the atrial AVEIR, and it was standing room only. This was an Abbott satellite, and it was incredible. It was as packed as the late breaker. So I put something on Twitter that said, the people want AAI, because everyone wants conduction system pacing to minimize tachy-induced cardiomyopathy or pacing-induced cardiomyopathy. But then obviously the best way to do it in sinus node dysfunction is just don't even put a lead in. So there was a lot of enthusiasm for that. And I think Mahak is missing because she might be prepping for something big today. What's happening tonight?
I heard there's a gala.
The inaugural HRA Gala. And that gala is going to be celebrating the formation of heart rhythm advocates. A lot of the work grassroots that really came from so many different levels of trying to increase advocacy and support for this field that we absolutely love. So it's a black tie. Mahak and I will be co-emceeing it. There's a silent auction. There's a live auction. It's the first ever where we're activating together, and it's going to be a night, and there's even a dancing part to it. It's going to be really fun. So we're looking forward to it. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, we've got one more day of late-breaking clinical trials in science. See you at the gala tonight.
From San Diego, stay classy, HRS.